The Watership Down podcast is intended for listeners who are familiar with the plot. There will be spoilers. This episode is scripted, recorded, edited and narrated by Newell Fisher. Hello, and welcome to the Watership Down podcast episode 154, in which we'll be looking at Season 3, Episode 2 of the TV series, and Episode 28 of the series overall, A New World. I'm struggling to keep my voice this week, suffering as I am from a perpetual winter cold, but hopefully it will hold out. There was an interesting comment from Eric Steps on last week's episode that is worth quoting here, especially as I had a bit of a downer on the episode, while Eric admires it more. He also provides more detail on anime. Quote, "And here we are, the anime season of Watership Down. You probably wondered why I made this comparison when Watership Down of course is no anime because it doesn't come from Japan, but it already has shown some elements you normally see there. A character survives a situation where they would be 100% dead in real life, camping in the cave. Fighting is much more exaggerated and often the characters do not really have heavy injuries, seen a lot during the battle against Efrafa. And then there is, of course, the appearance of a higher being that communicates with one of the characters. The Black Rabbit of Inlay appears. Otherwise, this episode is very interesting, and even when it is as far from the source material as it could be, I like this episode. The moment when the Efrafa warriors give up and surrender is just beautiful, and Woundwort rising from the mud and seeing the destroyed Efrafa and then swearing revenge is just chilling. I think the decision to destroy Efrafa was made to have Woundwort also start from a low point and in the end to get even stronger than before. An element sometimes used in fiction. The best example is probably Harry Potter. The tragic element is that Woundwort finally had an epiphany and saw that his ways are wrong. The sacrifice of Campion was worth at least this, and all could have been getting a better end here if Hazel would not have decided to attack Efrafa. I actually had the feeling, even if it seems weird, this is something the book Hazel would also have done if Woundwort would have just been repelled and not been beaten at the end of the book. We must keep in mind that Hazel did before this risky adventure to get the hutch rabbits from Nuthanger Farm and still wanted to infiltrate Efrafa, even after the account of Holly. Hazel often was just passive in the series, so taking this kind of action almost seems a bit out of character for him. The quote, "the war to end all wars," was used for the First World War, and is such a bitter example for a complete misjudgment in history. Not only was it not a short war, but it turned out to be the bloodiest, the one with the highest casualties and most brutal war until this point. And the modern technology that could kill people with such efficiency in a short time, and the insurmountable deaths, led to a different view of war. Until then, war was seen as politic with other measures. After World War I, war was ostracised, but it didn't help, as we all know. Only 20 years later, an even more barbaric and brutal war was started, and still today there is so much war in the world. To use this quote in a series still aimed at children is a very bold move. End quote. Thank you for those comments, Eric. It's always interesting to have your perspective on this series. Before we move on, just a quick reminder about this podcast's social media. The podcast has a page on Facebook, and there is also a Facebook group called the Watership Down Podcast Honeycomb, where you would be more than welcome. The podcast is also on Instagram, where many images have been posted, and on Threads. Lastly, there is a channel on YouTube where all episodes are also posted, which you already know if you're listening there. I'm still showcasing Watership Down themed art on the same basis as before. The usual image is replaceable for an episode with your own art, details in the notes. So then, let's see how the rabbits of Watership Down and Efrafa are getting along. Season 3, Episode 2, A New World. The 28th episode of the Watership Down TV series was first broadcast in Canada on the 18th of September 2001. It was written by Mary Crawford and Alan Templeton, and its German title was Woundwort Never Gives Up. There will be a link to the episode in the notes. The first thing we see after the opening titles is 3 birds circling overhead in front of the sun. In the next shot we see what they are circling over. It is the mutilated Campion, unconscious or asleep out in the open. The 3 birds that seem to be crows land and approach their next meal. But Campion is awake, and with a kick makes it clear that he is not to be messed with. Nearby he spots an alcove in some rocks as the crows land on branches to wait for the inevitable. He crawls into this shelter, and as the crows start approaching again, just says Blackberry as his eyes close. Cut to Blackberry, who is digging underground on Watership Down with Fiver. Only she is digging at a crazy pace. Fiver tries telling her to slow down, but she just says they need more room now the Afrafans have joined them. It also takes her mind off Campion. Fiver tries to distract her by saying that Campion's spirit is still here, but that's no good to Blackberry, though it does make her pause. Fiver says he just has a feeling, but Blackberry insists they saw Campion die, and she doesn't need false hope. Above ground, Bigwig and Pipkin are enjoying a carrot together as Bigwig observes 3 ex-Efrafan slaves looking around nervously as they feed. They look as if they expect Woundwort to arrive. A shadow falls over Bigwig and Pipkin. 3 former Efrafan Owsler are looming over them. Their leader, a lop-eared thug, says they'll have the carrot. Bigwig stops Pipkin from giving in and tells them which way Nuthanger Farm is. Pipkin says it's just a carrot, but Bigwig sends him away before challenging the Afrafans to take it from him. 2 of them attack him from each side, but Bigwig jumps out of their way, making them collide. Nearby, Hazel and Moss, formerly Captain Moss of Efrafa, are emerging above ground when they are bowed to by a former slave. Hazel says they don't need to do that here. They are no longer slaves. The Efrafan backs away respectfully before seeing Kihar and running off in fright. Moss says it's all they know, and Hazel adds that there are still a lot of Efrafans wandering lost. It's up to Kihar and Hannah to find them. Hannah asks if they haven't got enough riffraff, to Moss's annoyance, but Hazel insists that having won the war, it is up to them to help the survivors. As soon as Kihar takes off, Hazel and Moss hear a commotion. Bigwig is fighting the Efrafans. Just as 2 of them pin him down, Moss knocks the lop-eared one away from Bigwig as he prepares to strike him. As Bigwig squares off again, Hazel orders him to stop. Meanwhile, Moss threatens the 3 Efrafans and tells them to leave. Bigwig says he could have had them, but Hazel is unimpressed. Bigwig insists it is the Efrafans starting the trouble. He goes on to insult them in general, but Moss has overheard. Bigwig says no offence, but Moss has taken offence. They now square off, and Hazel has to intervene again. He suggests Bigwig go and take out a patrol. Moss apologises. He says Woundwort's rule is like a shadow over them. Hazel says it is up to him to lead them, but Moss doesn't want to be a leader. Hazel says neither did he, but it isn't always a choice. Underground, among crowded, sleeping Efrafans, Clover and Hawkbit encounter a former Efrafan slave who asks permission to go for Silflay. Hawkbit is getting tired of this. Clover had been asking Hawkbit if he wanted to go and nibble some dandelion leaves with her. However, he has spotted, Dandelion nearby, who is flirting with Heather, the Welsh-accented rabbit from Efrafa, who is clearly the preferred option for both of them to, nibble dandelion leaves with. As Dandelion demonstrates how he fought at the Battle of Efrafa, Hawkbit sneaks up behind him and bites his tail. While Dandelion is hopping about in pain, Hawkbit smooth talks Heather into going with him instead to nibble some fresh dandelion sprouts, leaving Dandelion, the rabbit, raging about his dough being stolen. Kihar and Hannah are overflying the ruined Efrafa and comment on what a good sight this is to see. As they fly to the woods to look for runaways, we see Woundwort brooding in the wreckage of his former warren. He growls. Pipkin is sulking after being told to go away by Bigwig. He is found by Drumlin the mole and says Watership Down is too crowded and everyone is angry. Drumlin says there is always someone with bigger worries than you. As an example, he points to 3 crows circling nearby. Pipkin rushes off to help whatever the crows are targeting. Drumlin says that's the Pipkin he knows. Having got rid of the crows, Pipkin turns to see who he has saved, and sees Campion. Pipkin is looking after Campion, who asks him to tell what happened at Efrafa after drinking from a leaf filled with water that 2 birds fetch for Pipkin. Pipkin recounts the events of the battle and says Campion should come back to Watership Down or the Black Rabbit will take him. But Campion says this is the place for him. He betrayed his chief and isn't fit to live with honourable rabbits. Pipkin says he saved Watership Down. He is a hero. Campion makes Pipkin promise not to tell anyone he is alive, especially Blackberry. As Campion collapses, he says he doesn't want anyone's help, but Pipkin says he will help him anyway. In riverbank reeds nearby, a heron pursues a frog and comes face to face with Woundwort. Nearby, Kihar and Hannah are talking to two ex-Afrafans and telling them how to get to Watership Down. They see the scared heron take off. Hannah and Kihar leave, and the two rabbits start making their way to Watership Down. Suddenly they are confronted by Woundwort, who says they are his first followers in rebuilding his empire. They run from Woundwort down the river, but end up in a swamp. As they sink into the mud, Woundwort says he will rescue them if they follow him, but they prefer to die. He leaves them to their fate. On Watership Down, underground, Blackberry is treating Bigwig's wounds from all his fighting with chewed burdock. This is, I think, the first reference to lapine herbalism in the series, and may well be borrowed from the RPG game Bunnies and Burrows. It certainly doesn't come from the novel. Bigwig's latest wound comes from saving a former Efraf and Owsla member from a weasel while he was on patrol. It is the lop-eared rabbit who says to Moss that he wants to go back to Efrafa. There were no ill there. Moss says to Hazel that the Afrafans, and I guess this might mean slaves as well as Owsla, want to be told what to do. Meanwhile, above ground, Dandelion and Hawkbit are arguing over Heather. They agree that whoever brings back the best Flayra from Nuthanger Farm will win her. Clover approaches the watching Heather and asks her which one she prefers. Whoever is strongest, is the utilitarian reply. Clover asks if love comes into it. Heather replies that there wasn't room for love at Efrafa, as she glances towards Moss, who is nearby. Clover says there is on Watership Down. Heather approaches Moss, who says he has some thinking to do. Heather says 2 heads are better than 1. They smile at each other. Campion wakes up to find himself on a promontory above a surreal spiked landscape. Behind him, the Black Rabbit of Inlay manifests. Campion asks if he has come to take him or is he still tormenting him with life. In reply, the Black Rabbit shows Campion a vision in a blinding light. He sees Woundwort, still alive, brooding among the reeds we saw him in earlier. The Black Rabbit says that Woundwort threatens the world of the living by seeking to build an empire of destruction in the Black Rabbit's name. Campion must stop him. Campion asks, hasn't he done enough? The Black Rabbit says he must fight Woundwort. He won't fight alone, but he must fight. Campion is awoken from his nightmare by Pipkin, who has brought him elm bark for his fever on advice from Blackberry. Campion says he doesn't want help, but Pipkin doesn't care. He persuades Campion to try to live. Meanwhile, more important matters are at hand, as Hawkbit and Dandelion have arrived at Nuthanger Farm for their Flayra off. Very pleased with himself, Dandelion produces a single carrot, to which Hawkbit responds with a whole turnip. So Dandelion goes back for more. Hawkbit tries to warn him that the dog is loose, but he doesn't care. Creeping up on the vegetable truck, Dandelion sees the farmer loading it. The dog is with him. Apparently it is now called Chester, rather than Duster. Once the coast is clear, Dandelion climbs into the rear of the truck in search of Flayra. Of course, that is when the tailgate is closed and the truck drives off. Hawkbit desperately gives chase, shouting at Dandelion to jump. Dandelion says, "Not without my turnip," and grabs one. The truck drives over a stone in the road, and the jolt ejects Dandelion and his turnip from the back. Clutching his turnip for dear life, Dandelion rolls over the side of the road, down a bank, and straight through the cover of an old well. Hawkbit looks over the edge to see Dandelion floating at the bottom of the well, using his precious turnip as a float. As Hawkbit seems to leave, Dandelion says bitterly that there's nothing between him and Heather now. And then a large stone lands in the water next to Dandelion. This is too much. Does Hawkbit's cruelty know no bounds? Only this is actually a rescue attempt. Hawkbit's idea is to drop enough stones in the well to raise the water and get poor Dandelion out. Campion is dreaming again. He is in a burning place full of Frudoodoo tires. Blackberry is on some kind of platform. The clouds part and the face of Woundwort appears. From his mouth comes a trail of dark smoke that surrounds Blackberry. And now the Black Rabbit of Inlay rises in front of her. In shock, Campion runs towards her, but an aggressive rabbit rears up in front of him. The Black Rabbit approaches the trapped Blackberry. Campion cries out and wakes up. Bigwig is telling Hazel that he doesn't think the Efrathans will ever fit in on Watership Down. Moss approaches with Heather and says he has been thinking the same thing. He needs to talk to everyone. In the honeycomb, Moss gives an inspiring speech from a platform about how the Efrathans and Watership Down rabbits survived the tragedy of war. The trail ahead is free and open. Hazel looks on approvingly. He goes on to say that Hazel freed them and gave them sanctuary, but now they need to make their own future in a new warren. They will all be equal and decide things together. There is a lot of chatter from the Efrathans. Hazel goes up to the platform Moss is speaking from to support him, and suddenly the Efrathans are chanting Moss Ra. He tries to object to being made Chief Rabbit, but Heather points out that they have just decided, together, as he said they would. Moss thanks them and accepts. Back at the well, a tired and cold Dandelion is saying how there are lots of does in the world but not that many friends. Hawkbit is trying to drop a large stone in and just about succeeds, but now he can't see Dandelion, just his turnip. In panic he jumps in. Fortunately the water has risen enough for Hawkbit to retrieve his friend and get him out. As they lie exhausted on the grass, they both give each other their blessing to be with Heather and agree to be friends again, whether they like it or not, as Hawkbit puts it. As the Efrathans leave Watership Down, Moss asks Fiver what his gifts see in their future. Fiver says it doesn't work that way, but Hazel replies with a list of all the opposites normal life should bring. Moss says they can't ask for more than that. He wishes the rabbits of Watership Down well and leaves with Heather. Just then, of course, Hawkbit and Dandelion arrive back and, after being updated, ask about Heather. Clover bursts their bubble by saying her and Moss will be very happy together. Blackberry comments sadly on how much Campion has given them all. Meanwhile, Campion sits with Pipkin watching the sunset. Pipkin says Campion isn't coming back to Watership Down with him. It is phrased as a rhetorical question. Campion says not yet. Not until he has done what he must do. But he doesn't yet know what that is. As Pipkin leaves, Campion thanks him for saving his life. Pipkin replies that Campion saved them all, and wherever he goes, and whatever he does, he will never be forgotten. Is it canon? I guess these days it is an assumption that I will just say in this section that the latest episode of the TV series is not canon. However, this episode does contain the first portrayal of something from the novel that has not been portrayed on film before. In chapter 50 of the novel, 6 weeks after the Battle of Watership Down, Groundsel, one of the surrendering Efrathans, has a conversation with Hazel, Fiver, Holly and Silver on Watership Down. This positive aftermath of the defeat of Efratha was not portrayed at all in the 1978 film. However, albeit crudely, it is here. What's more, with Campion in the midst of his extended journey of redemption elsewhere, the solid and honourable figure of Captain Moss effectively takes his place as the new Chief Rabbit of Efratha. Campion becoming the new Chief Rabbit of Efratha is also mentioned at the end of the novel, though here they will have to find a new site for their warren. And that new warren reminds us of the plans for a new warren between Watership Down and Efratha that is mentioned at the end of the novel and comes to fruition in Tales from Watership Down, in which of course Campion plays a major role, ending his days eventually as a resident of Watership Down. So, canon? Just a bit, simply for portraying something from the novel that had never been committed to film before. Next time, we catch up with Vervain and meet the junior Owsler, as well as a weasel.